G'day everyone, how's it going? Coming at you from the home studio today, and in this video I want to tell you about my 5 reasons why you should be using Canon LOG on the EOS R5. Now, as you know, I purchased the camera. I've had it for about 3 months, and actually a video I just did on this, which is my 5 tips and tricks for the Canon R5, went really well so far. So I released it a couple of weeks ago. It's almost had nearly 2,000 views, a bunch of great comments, and yeah, it shows you why I think the Canon R5 is awesome and gives you some tips around how to use the camera and some of the settings that you probably wouldn't hear about on normal reviews of the camera. So after using it for about 3 months, I've come up with these 5 reasons why I think you need to be using C-Log on the camera. So let's get straight into this video. So the first reason that I think you should be using C-Log on the Canon R5 is because of the increase in dynamic range. Now, a scene like what you're seeing right now with just one big softbox lighting this whole scene, you probably don't need to use C-Log for a scene like this, but I'm still shooting this in C-Log, and that's because I get a bit of an increase in dynamic range. It means that I can dumb down the shadows a little more and make it a little more moody and a little darker, and I can sort of put the light up a little bit brighter on my face, so it creates a bit more mood in the scene. It means I can capture this light behind me without it blowing out in the image, and it gives a better look and feel to the kind of tungsten light behind me. So that's the first reason, dynamic range increase. If I show you this shot on screen right now, you can basically see this was shot quite low light, dimly lit with C-Log. Now, as I apply just a single LUT on this, which is one of my base LUTs from my LUT packs that are available on my website, you can see this one's called my Crush LUT, and you can see straight away that the image pops really nicely, and there's a great gradation between the highlights on my face and the shadows on the other side of my face. It creates a really nice dynamic range. And so even in a scene that doesn't have a sunlight or a window in it, and is like this scene, and you don't have a high dynamic range, you can still get a bit of an edge from shooting C-Log for a scene like this. Number 2 is that it has very pleasing highlight roll off. Now, one of the things with a normal standard picture profile, like say for example standard or a neutral profile, is that I find that it's blocky in the highlight roll off for whatever reason. I'll talk about another point in a minute for I think one of the reasons for that, but the highlight roll off is just super pleasing for the Canon LOG. So in this particular scene, you can see that the highlights are kind of on my face, my forehead where the light is, but the roll off to the shadows on the shadow side of my face, even if I turn kind of like this, and the roll off to the shadow is really pleasing. And even in this shot that I showed in the first instance, not only is there a great dynamic range, nice gradation across the skin, the roll off of the highlight to the shadow is also much more pleasing. And I feel like there's like another step between those highlights to lowlights or highlights to shadows that you want to use C-Log to be able to get. And this means that you can set up a shot with a lighting that's more moody and get a more cinematic feel to it. And so I think that's a really good way to utilize the C-Log and the reason for using it on the Canon R5. Number 3, which I spoke a little bit about just now, is C-Log is the only way to get 10-bit 422 color subsampling out of the EOS R5. So this is really for the EOS R5 specifically. The EOS R is a little different because that only shoots in 8-bit anyway. So even the C-Log on that camera is 8-bit when you're shooting internal. But on the R5, you get a 10-bit 422 color subsampling, and this gives you more of an edge in the color grade that you can use. Not only does it give you that highlight roll off, which is really pleasing, and a better degradation, I believe, between the highlights and the shadows, more dynamic range to play with, it also gives you more color to play with. So easier to edit in post. You can add more saturation, you can pull more color out of the image, you can add a different color effect or creative color grade in post, and the image is a lot more flexible. So yes, you will have to transcode the footage. Currently on the current Mac systems, you need to transcode the footage in order for it to work, the H.265, I think it is, HEVC. But it just gives you that extra step, and I've worked that into my workflow where I use proxies to basically transcode my footage into something that the computer can run, and then I use Premiere Pro in my export, so it just picks up the proxies and works with those in the edit, and then when you export it, exports with the original H.265 files. So I've kind of got used to that workflow. It takes a little bit more time, but I usually download my footage onto the computer, and then I'll transcode it while I'm either working on some subcuts or some sorting of footage, or I'll let it run overnight on a big shoot. So I'll generally pull in the evening of the shoot, dump all my footage onto the computer, transcode it into proxies overnight through Adobe Media Encoder, and then I'll come back to it the next day. And even if I transcode with Adobe Media Encoder, I can then jump into DaVinci Resolve and I can use those images, those proxies in DaVinci Resolve. So depending on what system I'm using to color grade, I can still use the same proxies that I've made with Adobe Media Encoder. So for me, it works really, really well, and I've just gotten used to that. And I'm hopeful that the new Macs coming out are going to be able to edit this really easily. And I'm sure that there'll be also upgrades to the chipsets and things to allow us in future to just edit the H.265 10-bit files natively. But what you got to realize is there's so much more depth in the color, and there's so many more bits to the color. So it is a lot more information that the computer has to process with that image, H.265 10-bit 422 compared to the H.264 that we've grown to be used to and grown to love for most of what we do. But yeah, just using the H.265 is stepping it up, because that is C-Log. The other standard profiles, they don't give you that. So number 4 is, I believe that C-Log on the EOS R5, if you've come from a DSLR background, C-Log is the closest thing to a RAW workflow that you're going to get. Now we know on the R5 we actually do have the capabilities of RAW, but where that falls away for me is when I want to shoot in 50 frames per second and still get that 10-bit image. And so I can't use RAW for that, because RAW is only up to 30 frames per second. So that's where I'm using C-Log rather than a RAW workflow. RAW actually opens up a lot of capabilities in the EOS R5 in terms of even more dynamic range, another stop or two of dynamic range that we get out of RAW, but because we can use the C-Log 2. But I believe that there's going to be an upgrade with the R5 to give us those extra bits of dynamic range out of a C-Log 2 or a C-Log 3 profile. So I'm really excited to get the upgrade that's coming for the EOS R5, and I'm really hopeful that those C-Log 2 and C-Log 3 are going to be in there. But for now, I'm really happy with the C-Log 1 that comes out of the Canon EOS R5. And yeah, basically, like I said, this is the closest thing you're going to get to a RAW workflow. Now, why that's good is because there's an upgrade pathway. Once you start shooting on high-end gear, having to transcode the footage, moving from, let's say, an EOS R5 or DSLR to an EOS R5 is a pretty natural progression. But then moving from an R5, as a DP myself, I'm often asked to come onto shoots and use a rented Red camera or use our Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, something in that higher end, Arri Alexa or something equivalent to that. So I've gotten use with those cameras before, and the RAW workflow of those cameras is much more like a C-Log workflow with the Canon R5. So whilst a lot of people in video specific want to stick with the standard profiles, I'm really keen on understanding and learning a proper director of photography / commercial editor workflow where I'm working with raw footage, like I've come from the Magic Lantern days of the 5D Mark II and III, using a raw DNG image sequence workflow. And that was a massive deal, and that was really hard to pull off, but you get great results out of a Canon 5D Mark II or 5D Mark III. So now on the R5, I'm happy to work with the H.265 footage because I'm getting a bit of a glimpse into a raw workflow. So any commercial job, a lot of stuff that's away from sort of TV commercials, but any film editing or anything like that, you basically have to know how to do a raw workflow. So the C-Log workflow allows you to get a little bit of a taste for what it's like to work with raw footage, what it's like to color grade raw footage, and it just gives you a bit of an edge over other editors as you grow in your understanding of C-Log. So that's my 4th reason why I would use C-Log on the Canon R5. So my 5th and final reason why you should be using Canon Log on the EOS R5 is because they are going to be releasing, I believe they will, Canon Log 2 and 3. So Canon Log 2 gives you another 2 stops of dynamic range. So it takes what we're using now, the limitation of say 12 and a half stops, I think it is on the EOS R5. It actually takes that up to about 14 and a half stops of dynamic range, maybe even 15 stops of dynamic range. And if you check out Carlos Quintero, shout out Carlos, he's done a video to show how this works when you shoot in a Canon RAW workflow on the EOS R5. You can interpret the footage with C-Log 2, and it really shows that extra range where you can basically click a button and just pull back the highlights, and it's incredible. And that's going to be coming, I think, natively to the Canon R5, and I really hope that they do release this. But basically, if you're not using Canon LOG and Canon release log 2 for the EOS R5, you're going to be behind the 8 ball when it comes to having a 14.5 stops, maybe 15 stop dynamic range camera. Now, I believe they're going to do it because the Sony a7S III has come out, and really it kicks butt in terms of dynamic range on the Canon EOS R, unless you're shooting in RAW on the EOS R. So I know there's that argument that yes, the RAW capability does unlock this on the EOS R5, but if you're just wanting to shoot in a Canon log profile and not use the RAW and say shoot up to 50 or 60 frames per second in slow motion, or 120 frames per second, 100 or 120 frames per second, super slow motion, then you're not going to get that RAW capability or the C-Log 2 out of the EOS R5. But if Canon do release the C-Log 2 natively for the Canon R5, that's going to be a huge game changer. That's going to give you like usable 14 stops of dynamic range. It's going to make the R5 an incredible camera for the form factor, the size, all of those things. And 4K, 14 stops of dynamic range in the crop mode, you're never going to overheat the camera. You can shoot all day in 4K crop, and the 4K crop image on it is amazing. So that just really is a compelling reason to work on C-Log, figure out C-Log 1, how to expose it correctly, how to expose for skin tones, how to utilize it in post, how to color grade it, using LUTs to improve or just speed up your workflow, transforming the footage within DaVinci Resolve, and figuring out how DaVinci Resolve interprets C-Log. All of those things are going to land you in good stead to be able to use C-Log 2 and C-Log 3 once they come available. Not to mention, if you jump to a C200 or a C300 Mark III, the C70 is coming out as well. So, if you're really moving in that direction of video, knowing how to shoot Canon log is going to be pivotal, and it's going to set you up to be a really awesome DP and well sought after in the industry. So yeah, I'd encourage you to shoot log. That's my 5 reasons why I shoot log, and hopefully that encourages you to get on the log train and start switching out from those standard picture profiles and start shooting in Canon log. Hopefully you got something from this video, and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you check out some other videos I've done on C-Log in the past. And if you haven't seen my LUTs already, they're specifically for log on the Canon R5, and also they'll work just as well with log on the EOS R, the 5D Mark IV, Canon 1DX Mark III, and C200, C100 Mark II. Any cameras that shoot in log profile from Canon, my LUTs will work really well, and it helps you to speed up the process of using log. So I would recommend you check them out if you need them. They're not very expensive, and I've developed them through my own workflow, my own experience, so they work really well. But that's all from me in this video. Hope you got something from it, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.